Welcome to the solution video for the Soda Machine Razor Pages User Logic Challenge. That name keeps getting longer and longer. Let's go to the Visual Studio and open up the Razor Pages UI and go to Pages. And what we're going to do here is add a new page. So a new Razor page, and we're going to hit Add, and let's just call this Soda Machine. I know we'll have admin pages or maybe pages, not quite sure yet, but we'll have at least one admin page. But I think it makes sense to call it Soda Machine since that's what the user sees it as. The user interacts with it as a Soda Machine. So I think we'll focus there and just call it Soda Machine. And so this will be all the user interactions, probably on just one page. And so our goal for this video will be just to do the logic for this. It won't be to worry about the actual layout on the page, just the logic. So all the stuff in the page model. Now we do have to bring in some dependencies. Remember in the console UI, we had in program.cs at the bottom, we had the registration of our dependencies, where we have add transient for iData access, and we have a page. Let's create a constructor for this. And we're going to ask for that iSodaMachine logic. Control dot to add the using statement. There, we'll call this Soda Machine. It's probably good. And we'll do a control dot to create and initialize that field. And now we can have access to our Soda Machine stuff. Okay? Now, doing the logic separate from the page can be a little tricky. And sometimes it's easier to do both at the same time, do a little bit of the logic, a little bit of the page, and back and forth and kind of see it operate. But in order to do this challenge and break it up in some kind of logical manner, I decided to do just the logic for this time. For our admin pages, we'll probably do it differently and do things a little more at the same time. But let's talk through what we need to see on this page. Because remember, any public property can be viewed on the page. So let's start off with, we're going to want to display the soda price. So we'll have a decimal called soda price that we will initialize with the soda price. And then we also want to know how much has the user deposited. So decimal and deposited amount. And we'll also want to show all the available sodas. So that'll be a list. And I believe it's soda model. Yes, using Soda Machine library.models. And so that would be, let's call this soda options. All right, so those three things we're going to watch on the screen probably all the time. So it'll be how much the soda costs. That's the kind of the locked in price. So 65 cents, I believe, is our standard. And then how much they deposit. It'll start at 0, but they put a quarter in, it'll be 25 cents, and so on. And then the list of sodas. This is a little different than the console application in that we're going to display the list at all times. Because why not? That's what a bind property. What that means is that we can post data to it. So you only need to post, you don't need to have a get for this. But that way the user can say, okay, I'm putting in a quarter. So that's one thing they need to do. The other thing is they need to ask for a soda. So let's do a prop and let's do a soda model. We want the actual model and we want to say, let's call it selected soda. And we'll make this a bind property as well. And so when they push the button for a specific soda, we want that soda to populate here. All right, so we know, okay, they selected a Coke in slot 1. All right, so those are things that the user will give us. And then there's some things that we're going to give the user. So first of all, we need to track who this user is. So we're going to have a, let's call it user ID. All right, and that's going to be that GUID. Now let's make this a bind property, but it's also going to support get equals true. And the reason why is because we're going to need to pass this user ID around. We're going to have it go between calls. And so we'll actually put it on the URL. So you'll see user ID equals and then the GUID. All right. So that's one thing. There'll be a couple more things we need to pass around, probably in a get as well, because we'll need to have it post to the page. This is one of the downsides of doing it with server side, is that we're passing things around a little bit freely on the URL. And that's okay in this circumstance, but if it's going to expand it all, what I would do is I would actually create some kind of temporary table that has messaging for that user and pass just the user ID and then do a lookup for those messages. But I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass a couple more things on the URL. One is going to be, let's call it output text. So this would be text that we display like, here is your Coke. Here is a change I'm giving back to you. Those kind of things, the normal expected messaging. Okay, so this would be a bind property, and this would support get. And then we'll do one more, and this one will be a string, and it's an error message. And this will be things like you didn't put enough change in, or I don't have enough change to give you, those kind of things. So let's just copy this. There's no reason to redo it. So I think those are the properties we'll need. So we'll need these three for display purposes. We'll need these two for the user giving us information. And we'll need these three for us passing information to the next page refresh. We could try and support state, but I really do not like stateful equals false. Meaning, actually no, we're going to leave it alone as is. So if it's null or white space for the user ID, meaning we have not yet filled in a user ID, then we're going to say user ID equals GUID dot new GUID to string. And what that'll do is give us a new user ID for this user. We'll pass that around for all future calls, but if there isn't one for this value, which will be the first time the page gets loaded, they're going to create that GUID. That's just a unique identifier for the user. Now, we have some values up here, the soda price, deposited amount, and soda options. Those are all static information you want to display. When I say static, I mean that they're not going to change between GET calls. The only way they change is if the user changes something, which will happen, and then we'll do a GET call. So they're not going to change while the user's watching. So soda price equals soda machine dot get soda price. Deposited amount equals soda machine dot get money inserted total. We need to pass in a user ID for this. So that's our user ID, which the first time we won't have any money inserted, but that's okay because that's what happens. When you walk out the machine, you don't have any money deposited by default. All right. And then soda options is going to be soda machine dot list types of sodas. Okay. So those three things will allow us to do is display the soda price right away, display how much they deposited right away, and display the list of sodas they have access to. And so every time a page gets redrawn, these three things will get pulled from the database and refreshed. That way, as the user deposits money, and have two or three of these. We'll see. I think it's at least two. So we'll have our first one. Let's make this just the default one to be depositing money. So if deposit, remember deposit up here is a bind property, which means it's going to be written to only on post. This is when they're saying, hey, I'm depositing a coin. Well, if that deposit is greater than 0, meaning they've actually put a coin in when they call this post method, then what we'll do is say soda machine dot money inserted. We have to pass in the user ID, and we have to pass in the deposit amount, or deposit, which will get added to the deposit amount. So either way, what we're going to do is return redirect to page, like so. But if we just do redirect to page, what happens is it wipes out this user ID, because all this page gets reset every time. The only way to send data across is to send it as a parameter. Well, in order to do that, we have to have supports get equals true, which we do. So therefore, we can pass in user ID. That's very important. Well, how do you do that? Well, you create a new object. And in that new object, you can pass in user ID. Now, normally we have to say user ID equals and the value, but since the property we're holding it in is the same name as the property we're sending it to, we don't have to do that. So this is a shortcut for user ID equals user ID. Okay, and notice it grays this out saying, hey, you don't have to do that. You can infer the member name based upon the property name. Okay, so that's what we're going to do for our first post. This is for depositing coins. All right, now we have another post, and that's going to be, what do we do when we actually want soda? Well, public I action result on post, same name, but at the end of it, we're going to say on post for soda. And this will make our lives a little easier in the front end if we call it on post soda, because we can call the path to it just soda in the front end. So, and we'll see that in the next lesson probably. But here what we're going to do is the same task as we have in program.cs. In here, let's look for the big method right here. Yep, request soda. So let's look at what we're doing here. Well, we're asking for types of sodas. We don't need to do that. We're asking for which soda number we need. Don't need to do that. We're going to post that. Remember, we're going to post. Let's close the stuff we don't need. So back over here, we have the second thing we asked for, which is selected soda. So we're going to have a soda model already. So when they call the on post soda, they're already going to pass in which soda model. Therefore, what we can do is we can ignore all of this stuff. This stuff is just getting the soda. It's looking it up. So we can go all the way down to here, request that soda right here, and then handle the responses. Let's copy all of this. Let's paste it in here. So first of all, we have soda machine.request soda, and we have the it says soda here, but we call it selected soda. And then user ID, we capitalize the U because it's a public property. So now this call will work just the same. However, we don't have a console to do console write line. No worries. What we're going to do is we're going to write to, in this case, it's an error message. Therefore, we'll write to our error messages. So let's do this. Let's say, let's wipe this out and say error message equals results.error message. And what that'll do is it will put that error message, it'll populate that with the message that was passed back saying, hey, there's a problem. Whatever it is, that's all we need to know is there's an error. We don't actually have to do any other work. However, down here, we do have some writing to our output. So you have the console.clear. Well, the equivalent of console.clear will be up here. We're going to say output text equals empty string. Okay, that way we can get rid of this, and we know that we're starting off with no output text. That way we're not remembering the last transaction somehow and putting more information on the end of it. That'd be awkward. We don't want that. So instead of console.writeLine, here is your soda. What we'll do is we'll say output text equals, let's get rid of that closing paren, and say here is your soda. Okay? And then if we have change, meaning that there's coins to be returned, we have this here is your change. Well, we're going to say output text plus equals, because don't forget, we're appending this to this message. The output's going to have all of this. But we have been working with console write lines, which put a character return at the end. That's not what happens in HTML. So we have to do the equivalent of that in HTML, which we can write raw HTML here. So let's do a couple of breaks beforehand. What that'll do is I'll have here is your results, and then I'll have two empty lines, and then here is your change, and we'll have one empty line at the end of that, or one character return, sorry. And that will put the next values right underneath it. What we're going to have to do, though, is in the front end, this will not get displayed by default. It'll get displayed as raw text. our results dot, and it looks like we have a spacing problem here. Whoops. There we go. So our results dot change dot for each has this loop where it does console write line, but instead of that, what we're going to do is say instead of console write line, don't do it again. Output text plus equals, and then we're going to have some string interpolation for our name, like so, and then we get rid of the extra paren, but not just our name, we also have to have that break at the end, because otherwise we won't have we'll have them all lined up right next to each other. We want to have them one per line. So that's what this is. This is all a change. So dime, dime, nickel, something like that. Okay, and I think that would be good. We do want to change, we'll copy these. Down here, this should change to have a couple of breaks. And again, we should have the output text plus equals, like so. And let's make sure we get rid of that paren at the end that is no longer needed. Okay, so now this is essentially the same logic we had in our console. It's just that the code is specific for the UI we're working with. Now, sometimes people wonder about the fact that we have similar code in two different user interfaces. So could we combine them somehow, or somehow extract the things that are similar? In theory, yes, you could, but really in practice, that's impractical, because you're going to make more of a mess trying to do that and have more coupling and have more problems that way than you really solve as far as problems. Remember that dry, don't repeat yourself, is not this pact where it doesn't matter how bad it hurts, we're going to do it. Dry is meant to make your life better. So if it's not making your life better, then don't do it. So the reason it normally makes your life better is because you have one place to make a change instead of 2 or 3 or 4. However, if you have just 2 places to make that change, and trying to put it into one makes for a 3rd place to maintain and all that stuff, that's not really better. So that's why usually you don't even look at dry until you have a repetition a 3rd time. And you got to be careful that you don't add a whole lot of complexity just to save a couple of lines of shared logic. So just think that through when you're doing this. Don't just subscribe to that everything must be dry. If I see a repeated if statement, I have to have it extracted, okay? In this case, it does not make sense to try and extract this into a uniform method that both user interfaces can use. Part of the reason for that is, if you notice, most of this stuff is just specific to the user interface. So what it would come down to is we'd have to extract out all the user interface specific stuff, and you're left with just a bare structure that wouldn't make sense. So in this case, again, dry does not apply, okay? Or dry is not being violated. Now at the very end of this, notice we still have this red squiggly. That's because on post soda still does not have a return statement. So we're going to say return redirect to page. And let's create a new anonymous object. We have to pass some stuff in. Wow. There we go. Got my keys my fingers on the right keys. We know we have to pass in user ID. But we also need to pass in error message, and we have to pass in our output text. Otherwise, they won't show up on the page. So those 2 things need to happen as well. So all 3 of these, user ID, error message, and output text, go across as a get command. They'll end up on the URL. And that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Like I said, if we're going to get more complicated, I would create a table that's kind of like a temp table in our database that would store error messages and that would store output text, and we'd key it off of the user ID so that you can pass just the user ID again, and we could look up those other things on the get side of things. But that's a complexity we don't need at this point, so we're not going to enable it. Okay, but user ID, error message, and output text, which is why up here, user ID, error message, and output text are all marked as supports get equals true. We are not expecting the user to post anything for parameters, but we do expect that the post will need to pass those in as parameters in order to then redraw the page with a get. Okay? Now, you may wonder, could the user modify this in some way and cause havoc? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, the user could modify it. In fact, what they could do is they could modify the user ID to be something different. And then essentially what it would do, unless they guessed the user ID of a different user, what they would do is they would actually just create a new user which had no money. They'd lose the money they've already inserted. If they change the output text, they could, in theory, have it say, you want $1 million. Doesn't mean anything happens. It just means that they've shown themselves text that they can manipulate either way. So there's not a whole lot of downside here to doing this. Okay, so with all of this, we now have an on post for our depositing coins, a on post, and this one is for used for requesting soda. So you have those two posts, but we are missing one. And I think this is the only one we're missing, and that is if the user decides they want to cancel their transaction. So on the old school soda machines, there was this metal thing you'd push down, and it would, if you'd put in a change in the machine, it would empty that change out of the machine and drop it into the coin return slot. Okay, that's what we're missing here. So let's create one more on post. Public I action result on post, let's call it cancel. And inside cancel, what we need to do is we need to do a couple of things. First of all, let's grab a fresh version of the deposited amount. So sewmachine.get money inserted total for our user ID. Let's grab that. Let's also wipe out the output text. So we can start fresh with that. And then we'll do, oh, no, we don't need to do that because we're not actually going to, we'll just overwrite the output text. So let's not even worry about that. Let's just, we'll do that later. We'll just overwrite it. So overwriting is the same, actually better than assigning it to be an empty string first and then assigning a value, because it's only doing one assignment instead of two. So we can get away with it this time. So soda machine dot issue full refund for the user ID. So we've got the deposited amount stored, because now we issue a full refund, which remember, that returns a void. It just does it. But we want to be able to show the user, hey, here's how much money you have, which I believe we did in program.cs as well. So let's find that. Cancel transaction. Yep. So right here, we have this line. Let's grab the string interpolation. Amount deposited. Okay, that's how much we'll have to change that value since it's not amount deposited. It's called deposited amount. But otherwise, I think we're good, which means we can say output text equals, notice the equals, not plus equals, and this value, and we can change to deposited amount. You've been refunded, and we'll format it in currency, this amount. Now we still need to do our redirect to page. So return redirect to page. Create our new anonymous object. And inside here, we do need to pass user ID, but also need to pass the output text, since that's what we changed. We don't need to pass error message because we have no error messages being generated in this method. But by not passing it through, it'll be empty then, which is good because there is no message for this new page refresh. Okay, so now we have 3 post methods. Let's name this one used for canceling our soda, our deposit, I guess. Okay, so you have 3 different post methods. Not ideal for a razor page. Typically, if you have 3 on posts, you probably have an MVC page, and that would probably make more sense in this case to convert it to an MVC page. But it's not the end of the world either. This does work just fine. It just makes the razor page a little more complicated and a little closer to what an MVC page is. So it kind of blurs the lines. And that's okay. If you find that you're already doing razor pages, there's no reason to swap over to MVC for one page. You can just do it this way and be fine. If you get a little more complicated or have more pages like this, maybe you look at MVC as a better route for your app or for certain pages for your app. The cool thing is with ASP.NET Core, you don't have to say one or the other. Even though this is a Razor Pages application, I can just say I want to add MVC as well, and I can do that and mix the two. And it's okay. I can mix in Blazor as well. I can mix in API. These are all kind of just Lego bricks we can add to our solution. We don't have to be limited to one project type. Now, I believe if we start this, we still have a couple of problems. The first problem is, let's go to our shared page and let's look at, we need the main page. The layout, there we go. So layout has some navigation, so it has home and privacy. We need to add some pages to this, or just one page actually. So let's copy this, privacy, we're gonna paste it. And the area is null, the page is going to be, instead of /privacy, it's gonna be /soda machine. And we'll call this our, instead of privacy, soda machine. So we have a link to it in our navigation bar. All right. And then what we need to do as well is we need to actually bring in these text files. Because right now we don't have those text files anywhere. So let's select all of them. All 4. I hit copy. And our www root, what I'm going to do is, I'm debating if I put these right in the root or if I put them somewhere else and try and copy them in. I think I put them right in the root just to not have to worry about it. This is not going to be a long-term solution. This is just for testing purposes. So I'm going to put them right in the root. Nope, I'm going to create a folder. Let's create a folder. We'll call it data. That's a little cleaner. And we're going to paste these in. Now, all 4 of these, if you look into the properties, it's going to say copy always. But if things are in the www root folder, just so you know, when you make modifications to them, it modifies the files in your actual project. So that's going to cause us a little bit of an issue. The cool thing is with Git, we can actually roll back those changes in order to start over, but it will cause us a couple of quirks, a little headaches. That's okay. It's just for now because this is obviously not what we want for a production application. If the production application really did want to use text files, and that's not an ideal production solution for anything larger than a very, very small project, if you really did want to use text files, have all the data we need. Oh, notice we also have a user ID. So A0365. So we're all good there as well. So we now have our page working as intended. Now, of course, there's no data being displayed because our front end of our page is just soda machine. That's it. That's kind of all there is to it. That'll be our next challenge, is to make this work. But this challenge is just with the user logic, getting this back-end page to work. So let's read through again that primary challenge, which was to create a page that interacts with the soda machine and build out the page model with the code necessary to support a page that handles user-specific logic. Okay, user-specific meaning we have our user ID and our logic is based upon that. So what money has been inserted is based upon the user. All right, and the bonus challenge was to have those task-specific posts. So for coins, for requesting soda, and for canceling our deposit. And we need to make sure that the text file data was properly wired up so it can later be used with our HTML side of the page, which it was because we saw the soda, the Coke, Diet Coke, and Sprite, as well as the 65 cents for the cost of a soda. Okay, so that's it for the solution for this challenge. I would imagine this was a bit of a challenge for you just because of the fact that doing just the code behind can be a little difficult. But in some organizations or in some work circumstances, you just write the code behind. You don't do the UI. That's a different person's job. So being able to separate out and just think through the logic and not concentrate on just the user interface or doing both at the same time, that's a skill that is good to practice. Okay, so we practiced that, we built just the logic, and I think that we're all set. Okay, so thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.